welcome to Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. I am your host, Megan, and my amazing co-host is...
Hi, it's Amanda.
Welcome. So this is our weekly book club episode and our final discussion dedicated to the book, The Homeschooler's Guide to Transcripts and Portfolios. Overall, it's been a good book, and I think it's fair to say that we've both taken quite a bit away from the book, some nice knowledge nuggets, but I think we're also both ready to move on to a new topic.
Yes, true on all counts. So, if you're new to our book club episodes, you're free to read along with us, but you absolutely don't have to. You are also more than welcome to tune in for the Sparks Notes Digest version, or for those of us over 40, we'll call them Cliff Notes. Yeah, so you can join us for the Cliff Notes, or you can read along with us.
Exactly. Either way. So yes, we are excited to be wrapping this one up. There's about 120 pages of appendices at the back of this book.
Good Lord, yes.
So who puts that much into just the after? I mean, like sometimes you're reading a novel and the epilogue is not that. And I'm like, oh, I needed more epilogue. I needed to know. I've never read a book and thought I need 120 pages of appendices. So I've definitely come armed with hydration this week.
I always have my cups, right? So this week I have one of our homeschool mom prototypes. You've seen I have a wide variety. If this is your first time joining in, I have a wide variety of cups. I like to bring different cups because they express my particular personality. And I was really torn today. I was torn between my Obama birth certificate mug, because it's we're recording during the DNC, but instead I decided to go with Inclusive Minds Change the World, because that also seemed appropriate for the week.
It does. Yes, exactly. I know. Yeah. Obama spoke last night. So we're on a little bit of a DNC high this week. It's been good. My kids all kind of naturally gathered around the television last night and we're like, oh, we're here for this. As soon as Michelle came out, it was like camped out in the living room. So that was pretty awesome. I've got a prototype also. We're working hard on our mugs and our goodies and stuff like that. We've got a bunch of stuff in our shop on Redbubble that's already done. We've got some stickers and stuff and some notebooks and things like that are already in there. This mug is a prototype. I'm working on changing the placement of it, but it says it's homeschool. It's got some really pretty books on a little bookshelf, and it says history minus the whitewashing, which is one of the beautiful things about homeschooling your kids, is that you get to tell them true history, not the version of history I learned in school.
Yes.
Yeah, the actual facts, even if they don't always make us look and feel good, which is how history works.
History is taught by the winners, and usually you don't win the big games without playing dirty. So, yeah.
That is very true. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. We just leave those parts out, which is, convenient. So thankfully in homeschooling, we don't need to do that. We can tell them the whole truth and nothing but the truth, which is pretty nice.
Yep.
All right. So one thing is for sure, our author of this book, Loretta Hoyer, loves a good worksheet template.
Yeah.
Loves. Wow. Okay. So I actually don't have a ton of notes for this week because I just think I read this in stunned silence. But you've got our first note for the day. What did you think, Amanda?
Yeah, well, there's a little bit less of what I thought and more just my observations of what we're reading, so that you know whether or not this is something that you need to go buy for yourself, right? And so I do agree with Meagan. She uses a ton of worksheets. A lot of them you could make for yourself, but if you're feeling overwhelmed in this process and you just need like an easy something you could tear the pages out of the back of the book if you're not going to use the book again, or you could make photocopies so you have it for multiple kids. I do think it's useful from that regard. So starting straight off the top, the very first appendix is about portfolios. We're looking actually at specific examples. I don't even remember what the title is. Let's see if I can find the title. So yeah, it's a portfolio and transcript sampler. So there you have it. And on the second page, so 218, you've got the trait-based portfolio, and her example is responsibility, and it's a portfolio about responsibility. And I'm not sure when you're ever going to use this. I was like, okay.
I mean, I liked the variety of artifacts, since she likes that word art. I liked the variety, right? She's got all sorts of things in here where so it's about her kid's newspaper route, right? And so it's, a thank you note from a satisfied customer, a spreadsheet of his reconciling of his newspaper route, a newspaper clip of him delivering the newspaper during a blizzard, right? So like there's a nice smattering of things there. But yeah, definitely I was like, I don't know when you're using this. I mean, it's
like
a lot.
when are you ever providing this specific portfolio? I mean, maybe if you want to, it's an internal thing to make sure that your kid realizes ways that they've taken responsibility. Because I think during that section, she did talk a lot about the ones that are just for in your family. And so I guess maybe from that regard.
Kind of an observation of your growth kind of thing and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I suppose something like that. But the next few pages I thought were a little bit more useful. So you've got examples of the showcase, the thematic, and the skill-based portfolios. The showcase seems to me what you're most likely to have to use if you report to any sort of oversight person. And honestly, and I think I say this a few times in my notes for today's episode, with Common Core these days, it's pretty easy to do and to put these things together because it's really easy to look at what the Common Core standards are printed everywhere. And so it's pretty easy to look those up and be like, oh, they want to know that they have learned this thing about Indigenous peoples or this thing about economy and the local community that we live in. And so like you just slap that on there, right? Copy and paste it and slap it on there. Like, look, we did this. And then
Done.
you have your artifact for how you did it, right? So so the showcase example I thought was pretty, like, most of us who have to provide some kind of a portfolio to an oversight body we're doing a showcase. The thematic, I didn't really understand why you would use this version of a thematic portfolio. And I was like, maybe I really should have gone back and looked at the portfolio chapters to see when she was saying to use the thematic. Cause I was like, I don't know, maybe if your kid's trying to get into a special camp or like a class that has like prerequisites or something, and you're trying to prove that they have it, even though they don't have like what's on paper kind of thing.
Specific prereq, yeah.
Yeah. And then there's the skill-based portfolio. And again, this was one of those things I'm like, and I'm guessing it's more for like artists or teens seeking, some kind of internship or something like that. I don't get it. I don't really know. This is not, we haven't. Yeah.
So again, I wasn't homeschooling 25 years ago when this book was written. So I can't say what the environment was like or why she felt like she needed to do all these things. Maybe that was the culture then. Maybe you needed to kill a fly with a sledgehammer because you were starting out so far behind the starting line in society's view that you needed to prove yourself in this way. But I just understanding that I can't remove my 2024 lens of homeschooling, I just looked at this and thinking, oh, she likes creating a lot of extra work for herself, right? Because in today's world, that's what this would be in my estimation. But maybe in 2000, this was necessary. I don't know. But yeah, I looked at this thinking, wow, you just really like to slice and dice the same information 72 ways and keep yourself busy, don't you?
Yeah.
Right? So
yeah.
I wasn't necessarily getting it.
I suppose from a how-to perspective, right? If you have a specific vision in mind and it doesn't align with exactly what everyone else is saying about putting transcripts together or putting a portfolio together, this might be helpful because it definitely looks at all the different ways that you can do it. So even if they're not ways that I would do it or that Meagan would do it, like it might be useful for you. All right. We'll just leave it at that for that part. Okay. So the next part is then we move on 222, we move into the transcript examples. And so the very first one is the Carnegie Unit transcript. And of all the things in here, it's the one that's kind of the most depressing to look at, in my opinion. But it is in line with what you might see from a public school, with the exception of the fact that her example even though she says it's a Carnegie unit transcript and it just has, a class name and the Carnegie unit, the credits and when the kid graduated, she did still put it by subject, not by year. And most public schools are going to put the classes kids took by year.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's not wrong, right? It's fine to do it by subject, but I think it's important to know that it's a choice. Okay. And it's a choice that is different from what they're going to see from other public schoolers. So again, not wrong, but it's important to know that it's a choice, and you need to own that choice and realize that that means it's a little different.
Yeah, so this is the way my kiddo's transcript is organized, is by subject matter or core requirement as opposed to by year. I didn't feel like I could ethically put together a transcript year by year because we didn't function in that way. So it would have been me very much arbitrarily saying this was 9th grade, this was 10th grade, when we didn't do those things in that time frame. A lot of times we would start and stop areas of interest over a span of years, and we would continuously kind of revisit them and build on the foundation that we had already laid. And so I looked at original templates that looked like that, but I was like, I'd truly just be plopping stuff where I felt like it, and that felt dishonest. So I organized in this regard also, where I took the core subjects. I took the public school requirements to graduate in the state of South Carolina. I found the chart online, and then English 4 credits, math 4 credits, science 3 credits, etc., and just categorize things underneath those general headers instead of going year by year. So it worked for us. And he was going to community college, so wherever he goes after, he's in his 3rd semester now at community college, so wherever he goes after that, he'll be a transfer student, and so there'll be less weight on his high school transcripts anyway. My daughter, the same thing. She already has she'll earn her associates or Canadian equivalent in December, and so she'll be a transfer student wherever she goes, right? So for us it has worked because they haven't been applying to 4 years from scratch. And I think even if you were applying to a 4-year from scratch, like Amanda said, it would look different, but I think it would still work if they see that you're homeschooled. And they might, like we talked last week about some of the websites that I looked at, and like Stanford might say like, oh, I have some questions about this, or I might want to gain a deeper understanding. So yeah, if you organize it this way, they might come back with that. But I have no doubt that you could take the deeper understanding response and dazzle them. So
yeah,
I think it's all good.
Just if you're listening to us and you haven't listened to other things or other episodes, maybe for whatever reason you're just tuning in, I just want to highlight that Meagan made a specific choice to graduate her oldest kiddo. And even with her middle kiddo, they will likely apply as a transfer student, but there is the opportunity to do dual enrollment or concurrent enrollment with a child who is still technically of high school age, where you don't graduate them and they still get college credit, and they take that into a new school and they go in as a first year. So if you're concerned about the difference between transfer, sometimes it's advantageous to transfer into a school, and sometimes it's advantageous to go in as a first year undergrad. And so you can do both of those ways. You just have to look it up, but it's not hard to figure out which one you want to do. So don't get worried about like, oh, we have, like, I don't want them to be a transfer student, they can't take any college class. That's not how it works.
Yeah,
that does kind of remind me, though, we had talked about when figuring out Carnegie units, whether or not there was a difference in one-on-one tutoring versus classroom time. And I looked and looked and looked, and I could not find anything that actually laid that out. So I thought that was really interesting because, I mean, first off, there are lots of things online now that show how to do online classroom time and face-to-face classroom time and the Carnegie unit. And they basically all say online classroom time, sitting through an online lecture, is the same as face-to-face time. But there's nothing that actually talks about one-on-one time, which I kind of call BS on, because I was thinking about, like how many famous people, we just wrapped up the Olympics, right? And the Paralympics are getting ready to start. How many of those Olympians were homeschooled? How many actors were homeschooled? And, we have this thing where like you finish a curriculum, and most of the time it doesn't take you a whole year to finish a curriculum. There might be some things that take a little bit longer, but if you're working one-on-one with your student, the curriculum doesn't take the same amount of time. You just get through it a lot faster, unless you're, taking bunches of breaks, which is also fine if you're homeschooling that way. But if you're just schooling normally and working through a curriculum, it does not take you 180 days to get through a curriculum, because
Right.
you're working one-on-one in a lot less time. It does not take the same number of hours. So I just feel like there must be like an understanding kind of on the down low that, like, well, if you finished the English curriculum for 10th grade, you got one Carnegie unit.
So that is, I'm pulling it up really quick. Sorry, you can hear me like clicking in the background probably. Hold on, I have something somewhere.
Okay, you look that up and I'll point out my other thing. So
yeah, you go.
When
you
I
go
was
yourself.
So when I was researching this, the one thing that I did find that I thought was pretty interesting was there are a couple actually articles in Education Week from late 2022 where the Carnegie Foundation is talking about the need for a mastery way to measure knowledge versus the hours way. And they have embarked on a 10-year research and reevaluation project to look and see if there's a better way of notating when students have mastery of a subject that does not involve the actual Carnegie units. So I thought that was actually pretty interesting. And the article is worth reading, right? Because they talk about the economy of education and the fact that it's really hard to make sure that everyone is using the same understanding of things and, uniformity across all states and all institutions. And that's why the Carnegie unit has held on for so long, even though most people understand that one full year of math curriculum doesn't mean that all of the kids understand the same information at the end of the year. Like, everyone knows that's not true, but it is like a universally recognized way of measuring how much time was spent.
So I had found something to your point about finishing curriculum, and I screen sharing for the first time on our podcast. Look at me go, right? If you're watching on video, great. If you're not, we'll tell you out loud, right? So I had done research for this at one point, what counts as a credit. And so this one says 150 hours per year equals 1 credit, or 75 hours per year equals a half credit. I've also seen 120 hours and 60 hours, right? So right there's ambiguity in what counts as a credit, right? Everybody is kind of submitting their own things. People who are using college credit courses as high school credits, right? So a 3 to 5 college credit course counting as 1 credit on a high school transcript. For us, we would just use that as a college credit in my personal family life, or a 1 to 2 credit college course counting as a half credit. But this was the one that popped into my head when you were talking, Amanda, that 80% of a completed high school textbook, high school level or higher textbook, counts as 1 credit. So understanding that even in the public school system, they don't usually finish the textbooks. So if you've got a math curriculum and you blew through it in 5 months, but your kid completed the whole textbook or 80% or more of it, and it was high school level or higher, that counts as 1 credit. And so that would override the number of hours necessary. I totally forgot about that factor until you just said that. And then I added another one to this slide when I created it, which says, I know what my kid did, and what I said is a credit, full stop. Like, there's sometimes where I feel like I don't need to have counted every single hour to know that my kid took on a massive project that he's been working on for 2 years. And I'm like, yeah, it counts, right? Like, that was the level of learning, and then the level of passion and depth was so rigorous that I counted it, right? So there's an element of that too as a parent, right?
Not Education Week article, the head of the Carnegie Foundation at the time was saying, like, there's comfort in knowing that 4 classes a week of math, 4 40-minute classes a week of math every week of a school year equals math. Like, that equals math. That's 1 math credit. And it is, the people who want a clear cut, like, this is how it works, and this is, yeah. And so it's easy to understand why that's so common and it's still used. And and all of that jazz. But the reality is if you went through public school, the kid who slept through the back of the class and still graduated with everyone else. Like, we all know that kid. It's a reality.
So, I'm laughing because Liam
You
took
were
his
that kid?
Oh no. So Liam took his college algebra test last week, and there was a trig component on it at the very end. When he got to the last unit, there was some trig in there, and he'd never really done trig. So I certainly wasn't helping him. He was working on figuring that out, and he was watching the videos, and it took him a little longer to get through those sections. And I was like, oh, I said, I have some help for trig if you need any support, because I took a full year of trig. And he's looking at me like, surely there's a twist in this, because there's no way my mother's helping me with trig. So I said, okay, when I went to school, we had uniforms, right? And we had a choice between a skirt and a kilt, and the kilt had the wraparound and whatever. And I just felt more comfortable in it. And so I always wore a kilt all 4 years. And I said, you just tape a piece of paper inside the front flap of your kilt. But I said, you have to tape it in upside down, so that when you're sitting at your desk and you fold it up, it's right side up now, and then you can see all the trig equations. And he just rolled his eyes, and he was like, thanks for the support, Mom. And I was like, listen, I passed trig, okay? That's all you need to know. So I was awake and still didn't get it, but I figured it out.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you essentially gave yourself open book tests, which we've talked before about the fact that why are we so worried about, how much you have memorized? I would venture there are very few careers in life where you have to actually have all of the trig formulas memorized to be successul.
Yeah, that would not be for me.
Yeah, you can hit Google. Actually, if you find that you really need one, there's a lot of ways to just look that up.
True story.
My next note actually was that we talked about the Carnegie Unit transcript. Then there's the content standards or course equivalency transcript. And I did think that it was an interesting mashup of a traditional transcript and a resume transcript.
Mm-hmm.
She points out that there should be an artifact available for review under each entry. And so each one of these things, I mean, it's a lot of pages. She likes to use a lot of pages. And apparently each one of the things that she's put under here is an actual artifact that you can then look at. So that's a lot of artifacts as well. I suppose it would be easier to put that together these days, because instead of having to have a diskette for each of your artifacts, you could actually, just link it somewhere.
Link a Google Doc or whatever. Exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, there's that. And then the next one that she highlights is the performance standards transcript on page 230. And I was like, I mean, it's called performance standards. So maybe for a performance art school or something like that. I don't know.
It reminded me of the kindergarten report card that we looked at when we did the episode called "What the Fuck Did We Do to Kindergarten?" Where it was like, Mary can hop on one foot, Mary can stack blocks. Like, I kind of felt like it was like that, but it was like the high school equivalent, because it was like, write a short story, discuss important American documents, cycle, swim, ski, and sail, officiate youth basketball. I mean, some of it was just.
That's it. And again, I think this is probably a product of the time that she was doing it, because she does say that this outlines their family's criteria for graduation. And then she goes on to, that he's achieved each thing that they needed him to achieve to graduate from their family high school. But I just don't think that I don't think that you should probably use it that way these days. Right. Okay, I'm going to put that out there. In 2024 and moving forward, I don't think you should use the performance standards transcript the same way that she did. Now, if you want to use it for like a performing arts school, or some kind of intensive or something like that, and you feel like you want to put something together, like, I guess by all means go for it.
Have at it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So after that one, you've got the resume transcript. It's again grouped by subject, but it puts dates to things. So it does look very much like a resume, and each job is actually subject. And I mean, putting dates to things, it may or may not work well depending on how you've studied and how you've learned and what you want to include. It does better show travel, service, starting a business, those kinds of things that can be a little bit harder to incorporate well into a more traditional transcript. But it's long.
Oh, it's
Though
long.
not as long as the next one.
Yeah. I literally wrote on the next one, I was like, wow, that's a lot, right?
Yeah.
I'm just looking at this though, and I'm like, this kid must have been fun. Like, he did a radio internship. He was the drummer and fifer of the 10th Massachusetts Regiment reenactment group. Like, he just seems like a fun kid, I mean, he's got a bunch of stuff going on. He skis, he swims, he does this, he does that. He did an internship at a radio station. I'm like, he's all over the place. He's kind of he's got to be like a fun cat to go and like have a piece of pizza with and like chat about life with,
Yeah, like, what are you up to now? Right?
Exactly, right.
Yeah, for real.
All right, so next is the reflective transcript. And she starts off with this letter, and I made a note that just says, I feel like a letter from mommy and daddy is a bit helicopterish, right? Like, it is literally a letter from them, from Bill and Loretta Hoyer, explaining the transcript and what they've gotten there and kind of explaining their kid. And I just felt like, again, maybe in 2000, because they were the school administrator, if you will, like maybe that was the thing to do. But it feels a bit like mommy and daddy helicoptering, right? Like, that's how it comes across to me. And I think part of that, I'm a little bit tainted by, we read that book in book club called Raising a Good Adult, or How to Raise an Adult, or something. It had yellow and white stripes on the cover and red letters. That's all I remember. It was, the author was a dean, or a former dean at Stanford, I want to say. And she just went through example after example after example of things that they had seen at the school where these kids showed up completely unprepared to deal with life because their parents had consistently removed obstacles and just smoothed their entire path so that the kid could solely focus on academics and excel at academics. And then they showed up at college completely unprepared to navigate the actual world. And so I think I am a little bit tainted by that book. But that kind of influenced my thinking over this letter of being like, I would not write a letter for my kid to go to school. I mean, if they required something from me as the administrator of the homeschool, I would send something. But otherwise, I feel like it's a little bit like mommy and daddy-ish. Like, he had to do something at administration not that long ago, and like he went and did it himself, and then he couldn't get it done, and then a professor went with him to administration to help him through it and whatever. But like, it was hard because I could have totally showed up, and it wasn't like I wasn't willing to help, but I was like, okay, I mean, even when we went and filled out his FAFSA form at school, the lady was asking questions, and I started to answer one at one point, and she was like, this is his application. And I was like, okay. So, I was like, I just kind of sit back and let him do his thing. So I feel like the letter from mom and dad to me was like, it felt tone deaf, at least in today's day and age. I couldn't say about the year 2000.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of those things. From my understanding, there are a couple of states that still require like a letter from your school for your kid to actually graduate, like that kind of outlines like the requirements of your school, your private school, and whatever. So I know here in California, you don't technically homeschool, you have to register as a private school, and it's a whole thing. And so sometimes, I don't think you have to do it here in California specifically, but if you're in a state where you're in a similar situation, I do know that there's still one or two states left that require like a letter from your school that kind of outline what you do and what your expectations are. And so maybe that's what this letter in here is for and about. I have to be honest, I mostly skipped it because I find pretty much all of her letters in the book like eye roll inducing. That said, I did think that the reflective transcript was an interesting idea. And yes, to your point, maybe an example of like making more work for yourself. But I feel like if you're going through and you're putting all of this crap together to try to figure out how to make your regular transcript, this is, like, why not start here and then whittle it down to the smaller transcript that you need? And it just gives loads of information, right? Like this reflective, it goes on and on and on. It's a lot of pages and there's like a paragraph under each thing that they did, but it does give a lot of information to your student, to your kid, and it would probably be really useful for them to have moving forward over the next several years to be able to look back and be like, oh yeah, I forgot I took a class in this, or I forgot that we did this and we talked about it and we learned this, because they're going to have a lot of things where like, well, I know that. I don't remember like how we studied it or why we studied it, but I already know that. So if it's reflected in your 15-page reflective transcript, it might be useful. But yeah.
I feel like too, we did look at the websites last week for some of the universities, and a couple of them said, I think Stanford definitely, and what was the other one that we looked at? Penn State, I think, said like we might ask for more detail. So if you kind of start there, to your point, and then whittle down, if somebody does come back and say, hey, it's like, boom, you have all this detail in case they should ask for it. So I can see where that could be helpful in those instances.
That's true. My literal note actually in my notes that I didn't say is just don't ever give it to someone. They need to want more information before you drop that novel on them, right? It's a ton of information. But to your point, they may, especially if you're trying to get into a really selective program or something like that, they may want to know what this interdisciplinary thing on your transcript is. And so to be able to send it to them and explain like, well, this is what that was. This is how we did that. I can see it.
Yeah, I could totally see that. Oh. All right. So before we continue our journey through Loretta's many, many appendices, we wanted to remind you about some other ways that you can interact with Homeschool Moms Unfiltered and all of our content and support and guidance and advice and all that good kind of stuff. So we host a Facebook group and a Patreon. Both are called Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. So if you're on either platform, it's pretty easy to find us. In fact, over on our Patreon, there's a free unit study waiting for you about hurricanes. It's super fun. Got some STEM activities and all sorts of good stuff in there. Patreon members get a unit study, a themed unit study every single month. And they also have access to 2 live meetings each month to support you on your homeschool journey and just help you build community, which can be a little challenging sometimes. We did an episode on trying to build secular, supportive homeschool communities. And I know I found mine virtually because it doesn't exist where I live. So check out the description for the links to those groups. We would love to welcome you and support you on your homeschooling journey.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So moving on to Appendix B, which is called the discovery process.
The discovery process. Okay, so I will say she started off with the following worksheets are designed to help you mine your memory and search your home for artifacts that are forgotten, hidden, or unnoticed. And I do think that from that regard, it's a good resource.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I have to say, sometimes when you're reading something and it might be good, but you're just like not in the frame of mind for it too. That could have partially been my issue with this particular section. Like we both kind of talked about last week, like we're ready to move on to a new topic and all that. And then last night on top of it, I was watching the DNC. So I was kind of like sucked into that and I was enjoying that and whatever. And so I'm reading this and I'm just like, what the hell is she going on about now? And so, so I feel like if I had read it on another day, I might have taken away completely different things, right? But 247, she talks about using your phone bill as an artifact. I just had that lady, that lady who's a meme that's like, ain't nobody got time for that. I was like, my fucking phone bill? Like, it doesn't tell you who you called on the phone bill. It just says numbers. I'm going to reverse look up every single phone number on my bill to see if maybe one time I booked a field trip to an oceanographic center like 6 months ago or something. Like, what the heck? So yeah, but I do agree. The list goes on for pages and pages and pages. And I did think that generally speaking, the list was pretty good, aside from telling me to look at my phone bill. I just wasn't in the mood for it.
I wonder maybe if you had a bunch of international calls and you'd forgotten about something. Like, oh yeah, remember when we set up that trip to Mexico to learn Spanish and we forgot about it?
I'm like, yeah, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine using my phone bill as, oh my gosh, I can't.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so the next page is the start of a long list. So from 248 to 253, she provides a huge list of things to look for. And it's one of those things, long, yes, some of it not applicable anymore, but generally good for like, kind of getting you going. That like that brainstorming, where you're like, oh yeah, I didn't think to look at that, or like, oh yeah, that reminds me I should look for X, Y, or Z kind of thing. And
Do
I
you
mean
have a
it's
lot
just
of carvings and ceramics in your portfolio, Amanda?
I do not.
Or
Yeah, so we have a class. He takes a class on art, and he's learning, stuff and things. So we have a small portfolio, like like but I mean, I'm not actually sticking the canvases in there, though I could look at them, right? They would remind me that he took a
yes,
class on perspective and layering colors. But yeah, we don't have any carvings.
he doesn't whittle
Um,
spoons, huh? You haven't gotten to the
no,
whittling spoons section of your homeschool
no,
journey yet?
no. And I gotta say, more power to you if you're going to include that on your high school transcript because it's useful. I don't really see how that's going to be real useful for us.
Applying to Harvard and being like, this is my set of spoons.
Yeah. It's like, I have always wanted to go to MIT, and here's my hand whittled spoons. Yeah. Um, so yeah, there's like, I mean, there are some things, like guidebooks. I do actually keep a bunch of guidebooks. We like we always buy the guidebooks for where we're going because I think, small side note, I think Lonely Planet is tops for guidebooks because they have great history, they have great information about culture and food, and like it gives a lot of extra like good background about your countries. And so I still buy one any place we're going, and we make sure that we read it and use it to talk about, and they'll talk about current political issues and things like that as well. um and I could see how I might forget, and sometimes I will like highlight things that we've actually gone to, places we've gone or done. And so, like going back through and looking at the guidebooks, like, oh yeah, we did go to this place. We travel a lot. And I know that's a really privileged thing to be able to say. And I'm happy to talk with you about ways to do it affordably. I actually just talked with a mutual friend of ours, like helping her get going because she's really excited about doing a big Europe trip on the cheap next year. And so, but
Love it.
when you're doing big things like that, it's easy to forget all the places you went. And so yeah, I'm like, okay, all right. I mean, I don't think I'm gonna look at my chat logs. I think chat logs in 2000 meant something different than they do now, but I'm not going back through like 6 years of chat logs to make sure that I didn't forget anything about homeschool. But after that, so starting on page 255, there are loads and
Yeah.
loads and loads of worksheets. And so I just wrote down the highlight, the headers, so that you have an idea. And now again, if you want to buy this so that you can make photocopies or because you just need the easy way and you just want to buy it and use them, by all means do it. If not, you can slow this down and pause and type up your own worksheet or Excel spreadsheet using these headers, because I thought that there were a lot that I wouldn't necessarily have thought of, and really helps you break down a bunch of things. So it's the worksheets in the order that she's got them in here. There's academic courses, interest-driven instruction, home-designed academic courses, apprenticeships and internships, co-curricular activities, extracurricular activities, areas of expertise and skill, areas of self-study and research, projects, performances, exhibitions, and demonstrations, employment, volunteerism and service projects, travel, day trips, health, sports and physical fitness, writing samples, books read, performances attended, films viewed.
It's a
And
lot.
that's it. It is a lot. Um, and I know that you said you felt like it didn't necessarily fit well with the unschooling way of doing it, because that's life, right? Like for me, I felt like for the most part, I don't need these as an academic homeschooler, because most of this stuff is pretty like clear cut, right? We know what we're doing and where we're getting our things from. And so for me, I felt like if you were an unschooler, it would be much easier to sit down and be like, oh, let's go find all of the classes you've taken from someone else. And that goes under like academic courses where you've just kind of forgotten that, like, I think you'd said previously, like what they took on Outschool, because they just take so many random things. And then interest driven instruction being, whatever they were into, and, how you've designed a course around what they were doing for themselves. And then the home designed academic courses, maybe that's something where like it wasn't necessarily your kiddo saying we want to do this, but because of life, in your family, they learned, home ec or some other kind of economics, or, home maintenance, or, that kind of stuff. And so, I mean, I just think it's probably just a really good way to help you like get all of your stuff and ideas down on paper and work from there, whatever you're doing and however you're homeschooling.
I liked the idea of doing the activity. Where I would struggle is separating them out into the categories that she listed. So for me, like, there's no difference between an academic course. I shouldn't say no difference, right? But the lines are very blurry between an interest-driven course and an academic course, and books read and films viewed, and like they all intermingle so tightly in our world that I didn't dislike the idea of doing the activity. It was more a matter of like, there'd be so much gray area that I think I would waste time trying to separate them out and trying to categorize them, that I'd almost rather just have like one big lump of a list, And that's where we talked previously about Post-it notes, right? And being able, like, I'd almost rather put all that stuff down on a Post-it note so that I could then shuffle my Post-its and say like, okay, this did lean more academic, or this leaned more this way, or this leaned more that way, right? But I think for me, it was just trying to separate them into those categories would be the part that would be difficult as an unschooler, I think.
Yeah. Whereas I guess, and this is just also one of the differences in the way that we gather information. And we see this in lots of things that we're doing, right? For me personally, I like having a specific prompt that I'm going off of, right? And so like, to me, if I were in your position, I could see being like, for example, like, okay, Astrid, we're going to do academic courses. Like, can you fill out any class that you actually signed up for and did? And then with interest-driven instruction, like, okay, can you use this worksheet to fill out all of the talks and presentations that you randomly signed up for, the one-off things that you signed up for and you did, and like, just so that you had them. And then I would still probably end up putting them on Post-it notes or cutting my worksheet into strips and then reorganizing them all over the floor, right, to what I wanted, because I'm not all about writing it twice. But
yeah,
totally.
But it is, so, I like the idea of doing the activity. I'd probably just change it up a little bit the way I did it, but yeah. Because I didn't realize how deep that list was going to go. Like, I saw the list on 254 where she lists all that stuff out, but I didn't realize there was going to be a separate worksheet at first for every single one of those things. So at first I just looked at academic on 255 and then interest driven on 257. And I was like, oh, lines are too blurry between those two things. I can't do that. And then it kept going and I was like, oh, the lines are just like invisible at this point. Like, I can't even, I was like, there's way too many categories here for me to try to separate things out, because everything we do is so intertwined that I was just like, there's no way I could separate these. I would waste so much time being like, especially because I am very indecisive too. Like, is it this or is it that? Should I put it here? Should I put it there? Like, I'm like, I'll just make a list. It'll be fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Whereas I'm like, I'll just put it on the worksheet and then I'll cut it off of that worksheet and rearrange it however I want. It's just a place for me to put down my ideas. So then the next,
like, to have options.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's it, right? There are lots of ways to do this. We say it over and over. There are lots of ways to do this, and there's not one right way. So next you've got you've got more sets of worksheets, right? So on 291, there's the artifact assessment worksheet. And this is kind of just a one pager, but I thought that this was actually pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
If you're looking at including an artifact, you can use this, and it has a place for you to mark off. Do you have the artifact? Do you need to acquire the artifact, or do you need to create the artifact? And then evaluate each one for credibility, clarity, quality, and context. And I think just having it there where you have to check off each thing, it's kind of like a rubric or anything else, but just that like holding yourself accountable and being like, okay, this is what I want. And then you're not getting it the last minute, you're getting ready to submit it. And then you're like, wait, I thought I thought I put that together, but I can't find the spreadsheet, or I can't find the PDF. Like, I swore I had it. Like, okay, well, actually, you imagined it in your mind, and you had all the best intentions of creating it, and then you ended up on something else, and it didn't actually get created, and it's not checked off on your spreadsheet because you didn't create it, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I think it's helpful. I mean, when my kids were little and we would travel a whole bunch, like I had 3 kids under 4. So, and I travel a lot with my kids solo, even when they were younger, I did. And so it had to be a very fine oiled machine, or else things were going to fall apart very quickly. Like me going through security with 2 toddlers and a newborn at an airport, like everything had to be. And so there was always a system, and I always had like standard things that I traveled with, right? Like I always had a nightlight. I always traveled with Sharpies, because it was like there was always going to be a time where I had to label a cup or label something so that we know whose thing was who, or a water bottle, like if we were in a hotel, and otherwise you end up with 50 water bottles everywhere. And so just having like a standard travel list that I could bounce off of every time. And then sometimes I may be like, oh, I don't need X on this trip, but that having a checklist is always like top notch in my world, as far as just kind of like dotting your I's and crossing your T's. So I do like it from that perspective.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so after that, we get into more worksheets that you can fill out. And so starting on 297, you've got a whole bunch of other ones. And now these ones, I will say that I was very much like, I'm sure for some people it's helpful. For me, I don't know how helpful this would be. I might look at them and, jot 1 or 2 random things down. But so you've got, I'll read through them again in case you're doing that. Like I want her ideas, but I don't want to buy the book. So personal and family calendars, homeschool log or plan book, homeschool finances and expenses. I thought that was interesting. Now, we don't use digital software to track our expenses, but if you do use something like that in your home, I could see how that would be really useful and easy to forget a random class you signed up for through some random company, right? It's not on one of the ones and you did, but it was maybe a big long class that counts as a full credit, but you just forgot that you used Next Level for this one class, or whatever kind of thing. So I could see how that would be useful if you had a good way of looking that up. I don't personally.
Scared to look at our homeschool finances.
I know.
I don't want to know.
Yeah.
People are like, how much do you budget? I'm like, there is no budget. And so I don't want to know the total, because I just do, which is not good, but I
do. Right. So yeah, that could, so sorry, excuse me. So after that, you've got personal logs, journals, and diaries. Okay. Computer digital files. That is not what it's called in here, but basically like, what do you have saved on your computer, and diskettes and thumb drives. Although she didn't have some thumb drives back then, so I'm getting a little ahead of her time. Items in secure storage. I'm not sure. I mean, I guess we do technically have a lockbox because, we live in a condo and there might be some important things that we don't want destroyed if one of the sprinklers goes off, but we don't have a lot of other secure storage. Map and travel brochure box. I'm a little like, okay. Photos. I think she's specifically talking about like photo albums, but there's photos, and then next she's got audio and videotapes. Your like, book, your album book on your phone, it's going to have all of that in there, right? For the most part, but that's useful. We talked about it before, posting things on Facebook, not to show off what you're doing so much as as a reminder, right? Of fun moments to be reminded of in 3 or 5 or 10 years kind of thing. And so I could see that. Boxes and milk crates. You're not really getting, I remember back when you used to get actual milk crates. These days, they're just the Target version of milk crates.
Yeah.
File folders, filing cabinets, cupboards, closets, cabinets, and shelves. I was like, okay. Bookshelves and everyday evidence. Well, I felt like we were getting a little less useful as the worksheets went on. But
I feel like
maybe
Marie Kondo would be like looking at this and being like, how much sparks joy in your life, lady? Like, that's a lot of joy sparking over there. We need to purge. I'm like, I don't keep any of this stuff.
Yeah. So yeah. But that does wrap up Appendix B.
But wait, there's more.
Yes.
Thank God you're here today, because I'm a terrible influence in this episode. I'm just like, this is too much. I'm done.
This is too much. I'm done. I was watching Obama jokes. So and they were full of them. So if you're not in that, like there were a lot of good ones. But I did the reading, okay?
I read it. I just was like, I don't know. I'm done. So I'm very thankful Amanda's carrying this episode.
All right, so Appendix C. It is titled Helpful Words and Terms. And it just starts with a glossary of assessment terms. I didn't find it particularly useful, but
I made one note. The one note that I liked, because I did read through them all.
And I didn't. There's one of the differences. I was like, okay.
Enough of this. I did like holistic scoring. So she defines holistic scoring as assessing the overall quality of a performance or product rather than analyzing and scoring each of its criteria separately. The opposite of analytic scoring. And that's a separate thing in here, right? So homeschoolers might use analytic techniques during the learning process to teach or fine-tune a particular skill, and holistic assessment after the project is completed. And as an unschooler, I felt like I did a lot of holistic scoring because we never tested anything. And so I liked having a term for the thing that I've already been doing, because sometimes I have a really hard time explaining what I've done to people. And so I liked that she gave it a name. And so now I will be using that more often.
Okay. I'm with you. I'm picking up what you're putting down. There you go. So just after that, on 333, she talks about this a lot. She referenced it. It's Bloom's taxonomy, and like I said, she talks about it a lot of times. It's a list of words and things to kind of help you. I don't know. It's kind of like a thesaurus for homeschooling. I don't know.
She really does like that book, though. She talks about it a lot.
Yeah, and it's it's a short. It's just like 2 pages of words.
It reminded me a lot of resume writing, right? Where it's like you always start with an action verb. And so that way, instead of saying like understands this, understands that, understands this, it's like different action verbs basically to, describe your knowledge base and different ways of describing things so that you don't sound like a broken record kind of thing. That's kind of how I took it. And I was like, I think ChatGPT is going to write all this stuff for people soon anyway, so it won't even matter.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's, so different ways to say knowledge, to express that you have knowledge, different ways to express your comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. So, do with it what you want. It might be useful if you actually buy the book, and I wouldn't buy the book for it. So,
right.
There you go.
I would think that as well.
So then the next one on page 335 is the Dictionary of Occupational Titles. And again, she's broken it down into something that she finds useful, and some other people may also find it useful. I
Just
didn't.
not us. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would not buy the book for it. But if you have the book already, it might be something that you want to look at and see if it helps you.
We're not finishing strong here.
No, we're not, because it's just a downhill slide from here. So on page 339, she's got personal trait, and it's called Your Personal Traits, and it's just a list of adjectives and phrases that you might use to describe dependability, common sense, interpersonal skills, communication skills, your manageability. I was like, okay.
Now, if you're sitting there thinking, wow, appendix A, B, and C, that's a lot of appendices. There's D. Okay. It just keeps going.
It
Thankfully, I don't think either of us did. I didn't even look at any of these. It's all websites and resources, and it's so old that I didn't even look up any of these websites, which is really not in my nature. If it was a more current book, I probably would have looked at every single one of them because I'm a bit of a nerd. But I didn't even look at any of them. I was just like, this is old. I'm done. The end. And I closed the book.
I mean, yeah, I briefly looked at some of like the titles or the different names of things, and I thought, well, some of them are still, good resources for scholarly journal articles or things like that. But I mean, truly, my note was, is there anything useful when it's 25 plus years old? And for the most part, I don't think there is. I mean, there are a few very rare instances where you should cite older sources, but in this day and age, stuff comes out so quickly, and there's so much easy access to new current journal information and articles and research. I know my kiddo was in a class and they said, generally speaking, don't reference anything more than 10 years old. Mm-hmm. And again, there are cases where that's not applicable, but as a general rule of thumb, I mean, really, you should be looking for things that were published in the last 10 years to support whatever you're doing. And that is not any of the resources in this book, in this appendices, at least. I'll say that.
Yeah, I mean, the earlier parts of the book had great stuff. So when I joke, like, we're finishing on a really low point here, but the earlier parts were really great. Yeah. And so it just, I think towards the end, she started to beat a dead horse a little bit. And then also, some of it was just outdated and whatever. But I took away plenty from the earlier parts of the book. So I'm still glad we read it.
No, absolutely. And throughout the earlier part of the book, she references these pages, right? So we didn't go, while we were reading through, we didn't go into the back because we knew there was a lot and that we were going to cover it later on. But as a whole, I can see how they would be useful. And I definitely, when I was reading it personally for my own personal use, perspective, lens, whatever, however you want to say it, I was going back and looking at the various, pages back in the appendices that she had mentioned here and there. So yeah, it's not bad. Yeah. I just wouldn't read them all on their own, separate and independent from the book itself.
Yeah, no, I thought it was worthwhile. So that was good.
Yeah.
But we do. So next week now we'll start a new book, which I'm super pumped about.
Yeah, it's a good one. I'm excited.
I am excited. So our next book is the Homeschooling Starter Guide, How to Create and Adapt the Best Education Action Plan for Your Needs. And we've linked the paperback and the ebook in the description. So if you want to read along with us, you can. I'm even more pumped about it because we posted it in our Facebook group that we host. And Kelsey, who's one of our amazing homeschool parents, said, this book was a game changer for me. And we haven't read it yet. So that got me even more super pumped. I met Kelsey at a homeschool conference, and I know that she's awesome people. And so I was like, oh, I'll take your recommendation, right? Like when you know the person, then it can even like solidify it even more. So that made me like double pumped to read our next book. So I can't wait.
Yeah, no, I thought the same thing. Like, oh, that's great. I have started it. I had started it a while ago, and I'm not very far into it. So I was excited to hear someone say this actually was a really good book for me, because it's also not very big. It's a pretty little book. It's pretty easy to get through. It's not going to be like really hard, heavy reading. And I think that's even better, right? When you get it, I got some kind of starter guide for homeschooling, and I kid you not, it was a brick. I was like, I don't know how, like, I might get through this by the end of my homeschooling career, right? Like,
how about that? Did you ever get that book, Teach Your Kid to Read in 100 Easy Lessons? Have you ever seen that?
I didn't get it, but yeah.
It is. I never even taught my kids anything out of it. This was still before we had fully embraced our unschooling selves. I got it from the library. I had to have it transferred, and it took a while, and I was so excited to get it. It was the dullest thing I've ever read in my entire life. It was so, and it's just, oh, it was awful. So yeah, I was like, and I see people all the time say like, I've heard this book is amazing, but I'm really struggling with it. I'm like, yeah, you're not alone.
I know. I don't. And even the people I know who swore by it and used it, I don't know any of them that finished it. Right? Like, it was great and my kid totally learned to read, but we only got through lesson 57.
That's enough reading. You're fine. You'll figure the rest out on your own. I can't do this book anymore. Yeah. It was pretty brutal.
Yeah. All right. So on that note, we would love to invite you to join us for book club. Right. So you've been tuning in and following along with us, but we would love to invite you to actually join the discussion in a future episode. So if you're keen, only if you're interested, feel free to DM us on Facebook or Instagram with a 1 to 2 minute video about why you would like to join us, right? We would love to hear you and see you talk. It's not just a podcast, it is a video as well. So you should be aware of that. That's why we ask for a video from you. We're excited to meet some fellow bookworms and welcome them into our, humble little recording studio. And you can record from wherever. Meagan records from a closet. I record from a bathroom, wherever you can make work. Yeah.
We will welcome you from that place.
Exactly. So thank you so much for joining us today. Make sure to tune in next week, right, as we kick off our new book. And we will be talking next week about dealing with homeschool backlash from friends and family. So it should be a good talk. And in the meantime, happy homeschooling.
Happy homeschooling.